Good afternoon. Before we offer some gratitude and begin our discussion about second chances after prison, I ask that we share in a moment of silence, to be still and quiet together. If you are willing, close your eyes. Think of an elder who has sustained you with love, and quietly invite their wisdom into our collective work. Because this struggle for justice is protracted indeed, and we are going to need all the wisdom we can possibly hold. Let us be mindful of the native people who were on this soil before any memorial to soldiers. Let us be mindful of the millions who are locked behind bars across our nation, some as young as 7 years old at this very moment. Let us be aware of silences that deafen, legacies of silencing, and the power of the human voice. For all of our relations, please join me. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kaya Stern, and I'm so honored to welcome you. I would especially like to thank co-organizers Elizabeth Hinton and Garrett Felber, as well as Elsa Hardy and Elizabeth Ross. You are, as Alice Walker writes, human sunrises. And without your shine and steadfast work, we simply would not be here today. So please join me in a round of applause.
Thank you, Kaya, and welcome everyone to our kickoff event for Beyond the Gates, the past and future of prison education at Harvard. This is Second Chances, Life After Prison. I hope to see each and every one of you and 5 of your friends tomorrow in Sanders Theater, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. for our capstone panel. This entire process was really a labor of love. Love between the three of us, love and passion for the things that we care about, and love for justice and seeing justice through. And so we could not have done this without the extremely generous contributions from a number of organizations and individuals around this campus. First, we're here today in strong solidarity and partnership with the DACA seminar for reasons that I think Carmen Perez and Jay Jordan articulated absolutely beautifully in the session just before this one. So I want to thank organizers Kirsten Weld, Walter Johnson, and Roberto Gonzalez for coming together, allowing us to come together in a spirit of love and solidarity. I also want to thank the Prison Studies Project for their support, and Kaya, not only as a co-organizer, but also as a leader on campus for many, many years, and for the Prison Studies Project organization that she is at the helm of. The Inequality in America Initiative out of Dean Claudine Gay's office, PBHA and HOPE, the Committee on American Studies, Khalil Muhammad, who personally, example of living what you research and what you work and what you care about, personally gave us money to help make this conference possible. The Safra Center for Ethics, the Charles Warren Center for Global American Studies. We couldn't have done this without Arthur and Monique's work in helping to get this conference together. Also the Mahindra Center, and especially the Hutchins Center for African and African American Studies for making this event possible. We really, really thank the Hutchins Center for helping us be able to gather here today to consider these issues. So thank you, and thank you all for coming.
All right, well, it wouldn't be a Harvard event if there were not an introduction to an introduction. So that's my role. And it's my distinct pleasure, really, to introduce Professor Khalil Muhammad. Khalil is a professor of history, race, and public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Suzanne Young Murray Professor at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies. He's the Director Emeritus of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, a division of the New York Public Library, which is really, I think, the most important institution for the history of Black life and politics and culture in the world. Professor Muhammad is the author of the field-defining and groundbreaking book, The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern America, which was published by Harvard University Press in 2011 and won the John Hope Franklin Best Book Award in American Studies. The book links the rise of the social science discipline alongside ideas about race and crime to demonstrate how profoundly blackness continued to be understood and re-articulated as a marker of criminality in 20th century America. Muhammad is a contributor to the 2014 National Research Council study, The Growth of Incarceration in the United States, Exploring Causes and Consequences, and has appeared in a number of feature-length documentaries, including Slavery by Another Name and the Oscar-nominated 13th. A native of Chicago's South Side, he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in economics in 1993 and earned his PhD in U.S. history from Rutgers University. And I'd like to say on a more personal level, a year ago, I approached Khalil at a history conference, and I asked him if he would Skype with a racial justice reading group. Come on, Paul. And that I started with incarcerated students in Oregon, such as Paul, Shane, Jarrell, all the folks out here, Dion. And Khalil, without even hesitating, talked to us for 2 hours on Skype, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, about his book that we were reading. And to me, I see his willingness to discuss that book in that setting as commensurate with the actual book itself and its importance, which is to say a lot. So I wanted to bring Paul up here also to introduce Khalil and just what that meant to him.
Hey, I don't even think I need the mic, but I'm going to hold it, you know. I hope everybody's doing all right. I thank everybody for coming. I'm here on behalf of Liberation Literacy, man. This is something that we started in prison at Columbia River Correctional Institution in Portland. So all this was a reading group. Gary brought in the book and we were reading. Now we have newsletters. Now we're at Harvard. Now we're doing things that were beyond the prison cell, beyond my imagination at that time. And if you guys can think about being in prison, man, right? I graduated 35 programs in about 4 years. The only people that did that was like lifers. And when you do this, it's like, it's not even challenging at all. That's what I mean by saying like, hey, how do you feel? I feel great. See, can you say it a different way? I feel even better. That was the criteria of some of the programs that I was doing. So I started to lose weight, if that makes any sense. Like you started like, man, this ain't enough for me. And then you got people that call and Skype in on you, that challenge you, that make you want to get up the next day, that make you want to press. Like, okay, well, I'm going to do a little something different today. And that's what happened, man. I really respect you. I really thank you. And I hope everybody here can just welcome him in and just giving him some love, if that's no problem. Is that all right? Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Paul. Love returned. Now, I have to be honest. I had a tough class today, and I have a lot of tough classes. But today felt particularly hard. And when I walked in, Garrett introduced me to Paul, reintroduced me, and it was a little out of context. And I say this because we don't all carry this weight equally. And Paul, the people on this stage, carry the burden of transformation, of education, so much greater. I mean, I'm just having a bad day, which pales in comparison to the weight. I don't know how to redistribute that weight. And I'm pretty sure that the folks who I work with as my colleagues don't either, given that a lot of them are responsible for it. And you know, we're talking about education beyond the gates, and Garrett said something to me which I think is worth putting in the space. It is very hard to decolonize minds. I wrote a book, you know, that the short version is that white supremacy had to be built again, anew, that the details matter. But I'm beginning to worry that even I cannot muster enough optimism to unshackle a belief system that is impervious to knowledge or expertise or data or experience or testimony. I mean, like, and so I'm grateful to be here because I need a little boost of inspiration. And what these folks on this stage do, you can't teach. It's not in any books. There's nobody's classes, can't download it. It's not on your phone. It's not in an Instagram post. So you have to be in the space in order to be reminded of how the voice, the stories, walking even just for a moment in the shoes of another person is actually the only way we get to something different than what we have. And so I want to introduce these amazing people because they're lifting me up just by being here with them. And I hope that you can find a way to pick up a little bit of the weight today, tomorrow, the next day, because it's heavy. To my left is Mr. Tyrone Wirtz, who I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting in Graterford Prison, where he was serving a life sentence as part of an amazing group of men who were not only there for each other, but also educating a younger generation in that Pennsylvania prison. He spent 26 years there until...
37.
Okay, 37 years, sorry. Let's count them, brother.
That's right. That's right. 11 years matter.
Yes. After 37 years was commuted by Governor Ed Rendell. Mr. Wirtz holds a BA from Villanova University. He has served as the president of the Graterford Lifers organization for over 2 decades, a tenure that saw the expansion of the organization's mission to include community service activities and advocacy on issues related to the rights of the incarcerated. Mr. Wirtz is a founding member of the Inside Out Prison Exchange Program think tank, a partnership between Graterford and Temple University, and currently serves as the International Think Tank Coordinator. He has testified before the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Judiciary Committee regarding parole eligibility for lifers, as well as on prison overcrowding before the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. Mr. Wirtz is a founder and president of the Lifers Public Safety Initiative and sits on the Mayor of Philadelphia's Commission on African American Males. Ms. Vivian Nixon, let's join me in welcoming Mr. Wirtz. Reverend Vivian Nixon is Executive Director of College and Community Fellowship, an organization committed to removing individual and structural barriers to higher education for women with criminal record histories and their families. As a formerly incarcerated woman and prior CCF program participant, Reverend Nixon is uniquely positioned to lead the charge to help justice-involved women and their families have a better future. While incarcerated, Reverend Nixon spent time as a peer educator for the Adult Basic Education Program at Albion State Correctional Facility in New York. Following release, she was ordained by the AME Church and currently serves as an associate minister of Mount Zion AME Church in New York City. She is a Columbia University Community Scholar and a recipient of the John Jay Medal for Justice, the Ascend Fellowship at the Aspen Institute, and the Soros Justice Fellowship, and the Petra Foundation Fellowship. She is a co-founder of the Education for the Inside Out Coalition, a collaborative effort to increase access to higher education for justice-involved students, and serves on the advisory board of Just Leadership USA. Reverend Nixon holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the State University of New York, Empire College. Welcome.
I gotta do some more. That was important.
Cheryl Wilkins is Senior Program Manager at Columbia University Center for Justice, and someone I've had the great pleasure of getting to know over the years in Harlem. There, her work is consistent with overcoming the damage that mass incarceration has left on families and communities. At the School of Social Work, she presents on reentry, as well as the ways in which families and communities are affected by mass incarceration. Ms. Wilkins has served as an academic counselor for the college program inside Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in upstate New York, and as associate director for the College Initiative, a reentry program that assists men and women when they pursue higher education upon release. She also coordinates the Healing Community Network program, which offers support groups inside prison and in the community. Ms. Wilkins has co-developed training programs for high school guidance counselors, public school principals, and practitioners on strategies for working with youth and families affected by mass incarceration. She is the author of Changing Minds: The Impact the College Has on Women in Maximum Security Prison and Women on the Road to Health. a study that considers intervention strategies for women who are at high risk of contracting HIV/AIDS. Ms. Wilkins holds a graduate degree in urban affairs and sits on the board of College and Community Fellowship. She is a recipient of the Brian Fisher Davis Putter Scholarship and the Citizens Against Recidivism Award. Please join me in welcoming Cheryl Wilkins. And last but not least, we've heard from Mr. Jay Jordan, but he is doing amazing work as well, has worked at the intersection of social justice and politics throughout his career. During his tenure at LA Voice PICO, Jay was instrumental in recruiting and training churches in the South Los Angeles area. He served as one of the lead organizers for the campaign to ban the box for the city of Los Angeles and co-founded Faith in Action, a group of crime survivors in Westmont area of Los Angeles working to transform their community. Jay has been recognized for over 20 times for his organizing talents, including the American Red Cross 2014 Hero of the Year, Literacy Foundation's Innovative Library Concept Award, and a special congressional recognition for Outstanding Youth Program. In addition, Jay served as co-chair for Joaquin, not a Californian, County Boys and Men of California Alliance, Juvenile Justice Committee, and was a board member for the African American Chamber of Commerce of San Joaquin. He made history by becoming the first and only formerly incarcerated field director for Congressman Jerry McNeary's successful re-election campaign. Again, join me in welcoming Mr. Jay Jordan. So we have about an hour and a half, and we're going to leave a healthy amount of time for questions. So it would be great along the way if you write it down, just in the interest of efficiency. And if you have a comment, we're happy to hear that as well. Just try not to have both out of respect for others in the audience. Their charge is a simple one. They have been doing the work. They have been in the trenches. And they're going to share a little bit about what that looks like so that we might learn something and perhaps ways that we can support them. And Mr. Wirtz is going to start us off.
Oh, really? Yes. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I am so honored and privileged to be here on the stage with these great people who are doing a lot of great work out in our community. I really want to thank the organizers for extending the invitation to me to come up here and to talk a little bit about my personal experience with the work that I do and what's kind of like what's going on in our criminal justice system. I right now work at Temple University for a program called Inside Out. I'm really big on education in prison, and it's been very, very, very difficult. And I know there's a lot, especially in New York and places around the country where we talk about education in prison, and a lot of times we talk about taking guys to degrees. But one of the things I really love about the program I work for called Inside Out, and I'm quite sure a lot of you don't know about Inside Out, but Inside Out is a program where we train college professors to take their students from off campus into the prisons and do coursework side by side with men and women who are incarcerated. We started off just as a program at Graterford Prison, and now we've expanded over 20 years. We are an international program. So all around the world, students, undergraduates are going into prison, sitting side by side with men and women incarcerated. And the reason why I really love that program, although I'm a graduate of Villanova University at Graterford, what I saw at that time were there are a lot of guys, I used to call them the elites, that went to college. These are the guys that had all the necessities to be able to go to college. They had high school diplomas, GEDs, they had the confidence, and they had the self-esteem to see themselves as college graduates. But there's this vast underbelly of guys who were like me, who didn't see themselves as smart, who didn't see themselves capable of going to college, didn't see themselves compete with college students. And I had a great opportunity to really build my confidence, and I went to school and graduated. But there are a lot of guys that were like me. And Inside Out is a program where it's all voluntary. So you don't need a high school diploma. You don't need a GED. You don't have to have the mental necessities or the confidence or self-esteem to participate. But what happens after that class is, and that's why we always talk about our program, is although it's a college course, it's a college program, it's more than about just education. because people find some things out about themselves. Not just, and I always like to say that our program is really about changing the world. We're not just a program, we are actually changing the world, because the students that go inside of prisons are the future leaders of this country. They're the future leaders of the world. And we have a famous quote on our, it's a famous quote because I've said it, that the wall is not there just to keep us in, but to keep the public out. And so they build prisons outside of the city, out of sight, out of mind, and then when we find out who's behind the wall is through the news media, politicians, movies, TV programs, and things like that. And inevitably, what everybody says is there are monsters behind the wall. And so what Inside Out does is they actually take college students inside who are nervous or anxious, who have fed into the narrative that they're going in to meet these monsters. And what they find out is that these guys are brilliant, that they are dedicated, that they are human beings. I don't know why you have to prove that you're a human being. That's kind of weird to me. Because I used to have a lot of meetings where people came in and they would walk down the hall and say, wow, this is the best we've ever been to. You guys are human beings. I would say, like, what do you think we were? You know what I mean? And so I really love this program called these. How many people here has never been inside of a prison? Higher, I can't see. I'm going to give you some advice right now. If you're concerned about criminal justice reform, if you're concerned about mass incarceration, if you are concerned about immigration, you need to go inside the prisons. It's one thing to stand at the pulpit and argue about injustice and never met someone who has suffered that injustice. Our prisons in this country are dehumanizing, they are degrading, they strip you of your dignity. And the beautiful thing about Inside Out is I get a great opportunity to meet people from all over the world. And when I talk to people from Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, they see crime and people who commit crimes in a totally different light. Well, how they said it was, we see people who commit crimes or wind up in prisons as part of our community, and our society has failed them. Wow, that's a novel concept. And I always tell people that the reason why in the United States that we do incarceration the way we do is because of the 13th Amendment. I don't care what they change. I believe that's in people's minds that if you are a slave, that I can do anything to you that I want. And that is what they do inside of the prisons in Pennsylvania. They dehumanize you. You are property. They can do anything they want to you. Now, once you come home, what are some of the barriers? I always tell people that a lot of times we think we know what people need. So I just want you to shout out. When a man or woman come home from prison, what do you think they need? Housing. What else? Jobs. What else? Love. What else? Huh? They might need all those things, but to get a woman here the prize, she said it. What people need more than anything is compassion, and they need love, and they need respect. I mean, even me, I don't know what this brother's been through, but I mean, I've accomplished a lot. I'm a social justice fellow. I've traveled, I've spoken, and I still get in some circles where people find out that I'm an ex-offender. They like, I thought you was a lawyer or a preacher or something, or a professor or something. You know what I mean? So that stigma is still there, right? And this is why when we talk about barriers, I know in Pennsylvania, there are more than the usual barriers, such as that when you come home from prison, you're on parole, you have to pay a parole fee. $30, I pay $30. I've been paying $30 a month for 7 years to be harassed, which is crazy, right?
The good thing is only $30 a month.
It's only $30 a month, yeah. But some other guys got some really extraordinary, because I was in prison for so long, there are a lot of guys where they passed this law in 1992 where you had to pay all your court costs, all your fines and fees and all that. So when the guys come home, they are burdened with the $30 a month. They got to pay for your analysis. They got to pay all their court costs and fees. They got to pay. The parole officer actually make you go down to the traffic court and see if you have any back tickets. and get on a payment plan for that. Can you imagine you just came home after spending 10, 15 years in prison, and you're living with a wife, a girlfriend, a family, a parent, a friend, and you're living there using up resources, but you're not bringing any resources in? It's a wonder why our recidivism rate is so high, because we see people as, we say returning citizens, but it's almost like we see them as returning slaves. I mean, literally, because that's how men and women who are coming home are treated. And I noticed this is titled Second Chances, but you know what? I remember when I went in front of the park, because my sentence was commuted by the governor, and in Pennsylvania, life means life. You can't get out unless you navigate this very highly political process to get out. I was able to do that based on the networking I was able to do over 30 years. But when I went in front of the board, I told them straight up, I said, I'm not here asking for a second chance. I'm really not. I said, I'm asking for a first chance. Because I never had a chance, because the playing field was never level. Because of racism and because of the structural issues that we have in our society. I mean, look, I could have went to college. I could have never wound up in prison. But a teacher told me back in the day when I was coming up, there wasn't this movement where everybody talked about going to college. It was about graduating from school, getting a trade, and going to live your life. Now, when I was in school, I wanted to be an astronomer. I was really into the universe. But a teacher, a white teacher, told me, when I told her I wanted to be an astronomer, she looked at me in my face and said, boy, you're not smart enough to be an astronomer. You got to be very, very bright. I would advise you to go find out something you can actually do, because you can't be an astronomer. And you know what happened to me and happened to so many men from my generation? And women. Oh, I'm so sorry. And women. They were pushed into trades and not for higher education. And I'm telling you, you go inside the prison, you meet some of the guys that are men and women that are there. When I say guys, I mean everybody. I know, I got to qualify that, right?
That's why we here.
Yeah, that's why you here, that's right.
That's right.
I like that.
So we're going to.
I think you said 15 minutes.
Well, we're going to bring it on there.
Okay.
I'm feeling like we better bring it on in there. So, but there'll be more opportunities.
absolutely,
Think about what you left on the table.
Yes.
Reverend Nixon?
Good evening, everyone. I want to echo Tyrone's thoughts, thanking the organizers for having this event and for being so gracious as to give me an invitation to come back to Cambridge and talk about issues that are really important to me for a lot of reasons. I was thinking about, while you were talking, I was thinking about where do I begin to tell the story? Actually, that's the first line of a song. I spent some time in prison in the late 1990s, and I learned more about, I think, the systemic structures of racism and inequality in America in that time period than I had learned in all of my previous years. And I came from a family that was very active in the civil rights movement, but their activism took on a tone that I later learned to describe as the bootstrapper mentality. I read this book while I was incarcerated, and the name of the book is titled The Way of the Bootstrapper. I'm not going to talk about the author, but, you know, Google. And it was based upon this premise that we've heard, and it was very popular rhetoric at one time, that the African-American community in America should stand up and take responsibility for itself, that men should, you know, take care of their children and stand up and be men, and that women should take care of their families and get off welfare. And this was rhetoric in the black community. You know, so I'm very equal about distributing blame for where we are, because it's not all one-sided. Lots of rhetoric in the black community. A lot of the tough on crime laws that were passed based on demands from the communities that were suffering most during the drug wars. And so I read this book, and I began to think about it. I had very little else to do. I was in prison. I had 4 hours a day or 6 hours a day of work where I was tutoring in the GED class. College was not available to me because I was in a facility that had no college program. So I read quite a bit. And I thought about this book and I said, the author of this book talks about pulling oneself up by their own bootstraps in a way that is totally disconnected from the systemic structures that prevent people from doing that, and in a way that does not acknowledge that some people don't have boots, much less straps. And the author himself had, I guess, in his mind, pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, but also transformed a community based on serving several terms in Congress as a member of the Appropriations Committee, diverting millions, maybe billions of dollars to his community to literally build a community up. And his rhetoric was like, we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. So privilege was not a known quality to this man. Like, he didn't understand his own privilege. You are an educated man, you were a member of Congress, the Appropriations Committee, you pastor a church with 10,000 members. You cannot equate your ability to build with the ability of someone who doesn't have those resources. Now, granted, all throughout history, we have seen people excel despite horrible circumstances. Mm-hmm. But even those people can point to the intervening powers that came into their lives to make that happen. So what was the intervening power for me and for many of the people I know who have come out of prison and are doing absolutely wonderful things and probably more civically engaged and more involved in their communities than people who have never been to prison, who are binge watching TV, binge watching Netflix and, watching football games while the rest of us are in the street trying to make change. So, not that binge watching is bad, I binge watch every now and then. The common denominator for me, of all the people I've met in the movement who are out there really leading the charge, is access to education. So when I was on my way out of prison, I had gotten this flyer from this organization called College and Community Fellowship. Now remember, I couldn't go to college in prison. There was no college classes. In 1994, the Clinton crime bill made it impossible for students in prison to get funding to go to college. When the Pell Grants were available to students in prisons, the Department of Education would give the money directly to colleges. They would go inside and teach courses. Now, granted, not every one of those college programs was of equal quality, and that's something that if Pell Grants return, we need to keep an eye on, because we don't want proprietary schools that are not giving quality education to have access. But the point is that there were some good college programs, 350 programs in prisons across the country, and overnight, Bill Clinton dropped that number to 8 that were privately funded through philanthropy and individual donations. So that's why college was not available to me when I was incarcerated. But I learned that I wanted to finish college. I knew that that was the way out, and I learned that because the women I was teaching in the adult basic education program, what they said to me was, if I had just graduated high school, I probably wouldn't be here. If I had just learned to read, I probably wouldn't be here. So I knew that education was an important thing for women. I went to College and Community Fellowship, brand new organization in 2000 that said, we want to help women finish college. And I'm going to try to make this short, but it's really a powerful story about how an organization that simply provided me with a mentor and a tutor now has become a national organization advocating for the restoration of Pell Grants and also the restoration of the right for any returning citizen to apply to college and not be judged because of their past conviction. So I went to the program. I graduated after the, and this is a funny story. After I graduated, the executive director had quit. She started another program. And so I went to the board of directors, and I was like, okay, well, I have my degree now. It's in nonprofit management, so I'm applying for this job. So I caused the biggest fight the board of directors has ever had, because half of them were like, yeah, she's one of our students, she's one of ours, you know, let's give her a chance. And the other half was like, she has no experience, all she has is this degree, and she just got out of prison 3 years ago. So there was this big fight. Ultimately, what they did was they said, okay, we're going to give you, I'm not sure how I feel about it now, but back then I accepted it. We're going to give you, we're not going to give you the title executive director, we're just going to call you an organizer, and we'll see what you can do. And, you know, a very low salary. I said, okay, fine, I'm up for the challenge. I took the job, and the budget of the entire organization at that time, this was in 2004, was $150,000 a year. Our budget this year is $3.2 million. And the person who was my biggest opposition on the board came to me within 6 months of me starting that job, took me to lunch, and she said, you were not my choice for this job, but you were the right choice. Because when you put the power in the hands of the people who care most about solving the problem you're trying to solve, the level of passion, the level of drive and commitment they bring to the work is not surpassed by someone who's doing it as a profession or for the money. There is nothing like putting the people who have experienced the inequity in charge of solving the problem. There's no better way to get to the end. My friend Glenn Martin, who is the founder of Just Leadership USA, and I am the chair of that board, has coined the term, the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from power and resources. And so my main point that I want to leave here today is that denying people access to education because they're incarcerated, that denying people access to education because they have a past felony conviction, as many schools do, putting a limit on what we think people can accomplish because they have a conviction on their record is not the way to work ourselves out of mass incarceration. There are programs all over the country. Ever since George W. Bush uttered the word out of his mouth, second chances, and the Second Chance Act was passed, programs have popped up all over because resources became available to deal with this issue. And we realized that we cannot spend our way out of crime, that incarcerating people is not a crime reducer. It actually, in the end, becomes a generator of crime. Well, these programs also, in the name of reform or in the name of trying to help people, put limits on what people can do. When I got out of prison, I went to 5 different reentry programs in New York. And every one of them wanted to put me in a 4-week training program that was designed to teach me, you know, don't show up to work in your pajamas, don't show up late, don't curse out your boss. Like, I'm like, I already know this stuff. Like, can you give me a higher goal? Until I found College and Community Fellowship that said, you know what, as far as you want to go, you want to get your bachelor's degree, that's fine. But we will stick with you if you want to get a master's. And guess what? 2 of our students went on to graduate school and have PhDs. One's a lawyer. Because we don't set a limit on what our people, they are our people, can achieve. Because we know that if they get the tools that they need, they're the ones who are going to transform this society. I've seen it. Every one of our students is out there doing it. And I want to leave you with this thought. Reentry is not getting people to a place where they are doing the minimum they can do, which is not return to prison. That's the minimum goal. That is like, really? I'm successful if I don't go back to prison? What if I'm not in prison but I'm living under a bridge? What if I'm not in prison but I'm making minimum wage and I can't support my family? What if I'm not in prison but I'm living in substandard housing? We need to set the bar higher for what we want for our citizens when they return home from incarceration. Because once again, you will find no better advocate for good social policy than ones who have been the victims of bad social policy.
You want to go? No.
Up to her.
Okay. So it's hard for me to start with second chances and reentry without starting with neighborhoods that aren't being invested in, without starting with schools that are subpar, without starting with the criminalization of homelessness, people suffering from mental illness. And for me, it looked like, it took me back to where people go to court and they start with your crime, and things may have happened before that. But if you don't have enough money or a good enough lawyer to bring these issues out, those are the people who wind up in prison. And so I wanted to start with that because I come from a neighborhood that wasn't invested in. I come from a neighborhood that where Carter came to it, he coined it as similar to a third world country. But I come from a neighborhood where I didn't even know the difference because I didn't know that there was a better life. We all was living like that. We all used abandoned buildings to play in. But when I went to prison and did a study on the impact that incarceration has on women in a maximum security prison, and I started interviewing women who lived as far as near the Canadian border, but in urban environments, and their stories sound like mine, I said, something's wrong with this picture. You know, this is happening across the country, you know? And so we started to just, I mean, I can talk about what education has done for me inside. There was no education program when I went to Bedford Hills. There were a bunch of trailblazing women who had developed children's programs, who had developed HIV and AIDS education program, and I came in and got on board with bringing college back to prison through private funding. So I can talk about coming home with a bachelor's degree, but I want to say equally as important, it was the lessons I learned in bringing that college program back. And that was the organizing, that was fundraising, that was advocating, that was getting private college presidents to understand that we never had a chance to go to school. So, you know, if this is what you in the business for, then give us that opportunity. And so there were equal lessons outside of the classroom for me as they were inside of the classroom. Yes, I came home with a bachelor's degree, and I can't say that it didn't help, but it helped me raise the ranks a little quicker. But similar to Vivian, it didn't help monetarily. I think I was making $9 an hour my first job with a bachelor's degree. But I didn't care because I knew I was going to kick it in. You know, I was going to kick that door in. So, you know, I kept with it. And, you know, just a quick story. Stories will last with you. My first day of, well, first of all, I knew that I was going to get a graduate degree, but I didn't know that I was going that fast until I went to a CCF graduation as soon as I came home. And so I came home in April, and I signed up for college in the next fall semester because that's how inspired I was to see women who were like me graduating and overcoming this thing called mass incarceration. So that was important for us as women to have an organization where we can talk about gender-specific issues. Because our first level of success when coming home, and although I know in our heart, that college would drastically transform our life because we had seen it. We had seen women coming back in prison. We had seen women graduating from CCF. But that's not our first level of success. First level of success is getting kids your back. You know, and so how do you go about that if you don't have the housing, if you don't have the job, you know, if you don't have health care? And so there are all these social barriers that prevent us from really reintegrating because nobody is interested in re-entering society like that no more. We want to reintegrate. We want to become a part of society. And I felt like as long as I'm paying my taxes that I should be reintegrated. But that's a dream, you know. But I'm working on that. And so in thinking about what college meant for, and I'm going to keep this gender specific because it's not oftentimes that women get a chance to talk about, you know, our path and our journey, you know, and the journey is not the same as a man. And if you don't leave here with anything else, please understand that a woman's path to reentry and into reintegration is totally different. And what makes a difference is kids. It's kids. Also, in thinking about what it meant for us to receive a degree, we weren't just getting a degree for ourselves. That degree translated to the kids, our family, our communities. The whole conversation in a prison visiting room changes when you're in college. You know, it's about what your kids are doing in school now. It's about going to a counselor and seeing if you can talk to their counselor. You know, the whole conversation changes because now we're becoming more educated. And we want our kids to become more educated. One of my first programs in coming home, my colleague and I developed, Kathy Boudin, was a program called Teen College Dreams. And that came basically out of our friends' kids growing up and now wanting to go to college. And they were still inside, and we wanted to support them. Why? Because there was no system in place that would support kids whose parents were inside with that college-going process. It was straight. It was no way that they could understand that if I'm putting these zeros down, it's because my mom or my dad is not here. And then it was also embarrassing for the kids. No kid in high school wants to go in there and talk about their parents being incarcerated. And so we became that buffer. And one of my point is that, you know, this college thing not only affects us, it affects our kids, it affects our communities. You know, I'm the go-to person about college in my family now. Every cousins and, you know, aunts and everybody calls me about this process, you know, because they know that this is life's work. I'm not even directly counseling anymore, but it's my life's work. I found my passion and my reason for living while I was in a place that was built to be darkness. And it was this college that opened my mind and my heart and allowed me to see. It was the sisterhood that was developed inside. And it was all of these lessons outside of the classroom that we learned and that we then brought home. And now we are the one leading this charge and trying to bring college back to the prison system through public funding. And so, yeah, we're working together. We work hard. The thing about women is that we need some food and a kitchen table, and we can organize right there. You know, we don't need a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? We're organized right at the kitchen table with a pot of beans. And that's what we do. And that's what we do as women who know. You know, when I first came home and was going to my first class, I was early, of course, nervous. I was taking a social policy class because I wanted to affect communities. I wanted to affect policy change. And there were a group of women who were outside, and this woman said, oh, I'm so tired of my boss sending me to the Bahamas. I'm maybe 3 months out of prison. I'm looking for the elevator. I'm nervous, you know. But then when I went into the class and we started to go around and she started the professor started saying, well, we're going to study juvenile justice, and we're going to study the education system, and we're going to study the foster care system. I said, I think I could do this. Yeah, I wind up getting an A in the class because we, as formerly incarcerated people, this is not a joke for us. We are serious about this. We are going to be, any professor who came inside and have taught, I mean, I have Columbia professors coming back at me and ask me, I don't know why I'm teaching in Columbia. I should be teaching in the prison. Full time. you know, I asked my students to read 3 chapters. They read the whole book, and they hold me accountable. And it's a challenge for them. And we often talk about professors going in to teach and how they, quote unquote, helping these people. But to be honest, everybody's helped in this situation because they come out changed as well. They're the ones that write the op-eds, the books, and just teaming up with other formerly incarcerated folks trying to make change, and it's just a better world when everybody's working together.
Thank you.
Good job, kid.
You gotta excuse me, my soul is young when my bones are old. 70 million people. 70 million American citizens have a criminal record. That's 1 in 4. 70 million, that's a big number. And so when we talk about, reentry or mass incarceration or these issues, we're not talking about it in the sense of we just want our lives back, or we want a second chance, or we never had a first chance. This is an epidemic, folks. You don't get to 70 million unless it's systematic, unless there's something going on. There's not, a fourth of the population just isn't inherently bad. As I said earlier, I hail from California, and, we consider ourselves trendsetters. Yeah. We set trends, right? And we set the trend of mass incarceration, too. We exported mass incarceration. We gave the world Nixon and Reagan. We gave the nation 3 strikes and the tough on crime. In California, we passed 1,000 tough on crime laws in the past 25, 30 years. 1,000 through our state legislature. 1,000. And as a result, 8 million Californians now have a criminal record. 8 million, and I'm one of them. My dear brother said about barriers, and I was speaking to Professor Hinton's class earlier about the barriers that people face when you have a conviction. There are over 40,000 laws right now in the books that prevent people from accessing housing, education, employment, occupational licenses. And some of these are very absurd. Right. In California, you can't become a nurse, you can't become a doctor, you have a very hard time becoming a lawyer, you can't sell insurance, you can't sell real estate, you can't be a bingo caller, you can't be a dog walker. I am serious, look it up. There are over 4,000 laws in California alone that prevent people from re-entering into society. And I love what you said about the metric for success not being recidivism, but quality of life. It just makes sense. How many people in here own a stock? Own stocks, right? So I started to invest in stocks like 10 years ago. And I invested in airline stocks in Southwest. I wanted to become the guy with the headphones in Southwest doing a little, I thought it was cool, right? When I was young, I wanted to, and I was thinking about this analogy the other day, if our criminal justice system, because we're all shareholders in our criminal justice system, by the way. Right. We all pay taxes into it. We're shareholders, right? So, if Southwest sent up 10 planes, right, and then 7 of those planes crashed, would you still invest in Southwest? No. 10 people leaving our criminal justice system go back within a year. I mean, 10 people leave our criminal justice system, 7 go back within a year. 7 of them, right? That is a failed system. In California, we added the R to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So, as a tax-paying citizen, I'm thinking you're rehabilitating folks, right? But yet 70% go back within a year? There's a breakdown there. My organization, I work for California for Safety and Justice. We're a public policy organization. I was politicized in prison, in 2007. When we were on lockdown and they started giving us cold food. Now, mind you, I got convicted of robbery and gun enhancement and aggravated assault, right? And I believe when we talk about second chances, we have to talk about accountability. If you do harm in the community, you should be held accountable. I don't think any of us up here believe that that's not the case, right? We believe in accountability, but we also believe in redemption, right? I'm the son of an old country preacher, and the Christian faith is based on redemption. Jesus died for our sins so we can be redeemed. This nation is about redemption. So I believe in redemption. So accountability and redemption. But when we talk about second chances, the third part of second chances is reconciliation. And that's what I think we're all talking about is where's the reconciling part? If we're held accountable, if we do harm and we do the time and we spend time in prison or in jail and then we get out and we have to pay monthly to be on probation and parole, right? And then that ends and we pay all our fines and fees. 2 weeks ago, I just got finished paying my restitution, $14,000, right? $14,000. They were garnishing my wages. They had bank levies. But listen, I did the crime, so hold me accountable. But what I don't agree with, when 85% of convictions come from a plea bargain, meaning that somebody took a deal, they didn't tell me about these collateral consequences. They didn't tell me about these lifetime collateral consequences, which derive from a term called civil death, meaning in the feudal system, right? If you did a crime, pre-America in old England, you would be considered civilly dead, meaning that your blood was contaminated. That's where this comes from. Our system of collateral consequences, right? Of this second prison, of this perpetual death that people call it, right? It comes from civil death. So you're saying that even though I did the time, we made a deal, and you told me I had to do 7.5 years in prison, you told me I had to do 3 years on parole, you told me I had to pay you $14,000, you didn't say anything about this conviction staying on my record for life. When you have a conviction in America, it never leaves. Even after you are dead, it still stays on there. 50% of the FBI's backgrounds are inaccurate. This is not made up stuff. You can Google all this stuff, and I encourage you all to Google this movement across America called collateral consequences. There's a national repository made by Margie Love and Elijah Hirsch, 2 amazing women who created this repository of collateral consequences. You can go and Google it right now, and they list the 44,000 laws that prevent people like us from reentering into society. And so when we talk about second chances, and I want to nail this point to the ground, that we're not saying don't hold us accountable. We're saying that we were held accountable. We're saying we paid our debt. What else do you want? It gets it's exhausting. Yeah. And the term, we are a resilient people, so the work that we are doing in California is very straightforward. There should be a sunset on convictions. After I do my time, that conviction should not be used against me to get housing, to get a job, to get a higher education. It's called conviction sunsets. Remember that term, conviction sunsets. These convictions should have a sunset date. They do it in England. We are testing it out in California. After X amount of years, if you do not pose a public safety risk and you have not been in contact with law enforcement, your conviction should be sunsetted. That is pure and plain and simple. If you paid your debt, you shouldn't have to keep paying over and over and over. And I want to say this in closing. The organization I work for, it's been humbling because our organization deals with crime survivors. We organize victims. And when I got hired, one of my mentors, Robert Rooks, he said, "Are you ready to do this work?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm ready to fight for justice. I'm fighting for my liberation, brother. Hell yeah, I'm ready to do this work." And he said, "We deal with crime survivors, Jay." And to sit down and hear the stories of the mother who lost 2 sons, one to senseless violence, and then one to the prison system. To hear the daughter whose uncle was murdered and fathered in prison. In America, mass incarceration was built on the backs of victims. They said that victims want tough on crime. They want more incarceration. They had, when we tried to repeal the 3 strikes in 2004 in California, they put a bunch of old mugshots on the TV right before, we went to sleep and we were winning. And then we saw the commercials of these old school 1940 mugshots of rapists and murderers and hardened criminals, and we woke up, we lost. Because they use this false dichotomy of the victim and offender. But when you go in deep and realize who are being victimized in these communities, it are black and brown people, and yet we are considered victims. My last point, that when I started working for this organization, California for Safety and Justice, and we did a poll of people who have been victims of crime, and we asked them, "What do you want?" They said, "We don't want this to happen to anybody else. We want prevention, we want intervention, we want trauma-informed care in our communities, we want education." Only a small percentage said they want more prisons and jails. When we talk about second chances, we're talking about accountability, redemption, and reconciliation. The biggest collateral consequence, and the one that broke my heart, was when we had a group of crime survivors, and the young brother was talking about how he got shot 4 times. And the first thing the police asked him was, "Are you on probation or parole?" When he said he was on parole, they handcuffed him. He got violated because he came in contact with the police. And when he got out, he fought it, and when he got out, he went to Victims' Compensation Board at the DA's office, and he filled out the paperwork, and they told him because he had a conviction on his record, he was denied services and resources because, and this is a legal term, he was complicit in his own victimization. When you have a conviction in this country, you cannot even be a victim.
Right. That's true.
I'm not usually at a loss for words, but I'm trying to figure out how to be most efficient in response because, by the way, the floor is open, so you can start to queue for your questions or comments. But it seems to me so much of the reentry work for, let's say, half a century, and even more particularly since 2004, has been predicated on the notion of broken people needing to be fixed. And what excites me and lifts my spirits in hearing your stories and what I hope is conveyed to the audience is that it's a sick society that makes sick people. And so there's going to be sickness that we're going to deal with. We need to start with the air we breathe. And it is that air we breathe that makes the logic of punitiveness self-perpetuate the injustice that is the story that you just described. So why is it so hard? What is it about the mythology of America's exceptionalism, of a meritocracy, of egalitarianism, fill in whatever term you want to describe, that makes it so impossible for people to see the sickness in our society as it pertains to black and brown folks? Because what I'm trying to figure out is how is it, because education on its own is not translatable in terms of what it is that you all have described. We talk a lot about education in this country, but oftentimes it's education to fix broken people. It's not education to decolonize or education for liberation or transformation. So in the context of these questions that come to us, I want to hear a little bit about how you actually educate people to think about changing society. Because I don't want people to walk away confused that you're sitting here saying we've fixed all these broken people through these programs and we're going to keep fixing them as if that is going to change anything. And I think that distinction has to be crystal clear in people's mind. Because at best, we have a system that takes people who've been harmed and tries to destroy them. At best. Okay. Paul, all is yours.
Okay. Let me get that out the way. Hello? I mean, we in there. All right. Just kind of piggybacking off of what you just said. So in Portland, we have a gentleman that has a disease that has been at a minimum for a while, and they're able to transport him. He has been denied TLC, which is like basically saying like you have an issue that needs to be seen by somebody other than the physicians that we provide. And he's been denied, I think, 7 times. I mean, I have knots in my head right now. I don't know if you guys can see that. I've been in prison so many times, and I've been denied access about 5 times with being presented to the TLC board to be seen by somebody other than their physicians. And then what they said to me was that it's not benign, and it's not, you're still breathing. Oh, you're still breathing. I'm sorry, I'm kind of tall. There we go. I was gonna pick it up, but I didn't. There we go. Hey, I'm gonna make it work. But my question to you, I say it's a question statement. What's the purpose of an educated dead man? Because we can get educated, we can get every resource that you have while being in prison, but if I don't actually make it out, because I don't think people understand that that's a victory in itself, is making it out with the conditions that we live in. But what's the purpose of an educated dead man?
Did you hear the second?
Yeah, I heard the question, but I think we can't think of these single issues, medical care for the incarcerated, education for the incarcerated, as issues that are in silos. They all need to be addressed. And what I say to that is that it is a bunch of formerly incarcerated people, along with concerned citizens, that caused such a uproar in New York City that the mayor had to admit that Rikers Island was unhealthy and dangerous and that it has to be closed. It was the ruckus of educated, formerly incarcerated people that caused the mayor to not be able to put together a commission, a committee to close Rikers without making sure that formerly incarcerated people are on the design committee. So that whatever jails are going to be built in New York City, I'm sitting right at that table saying, no, it needs to look like this. And the medical care needs to look like that. And for women, it needs to look like that. What education does is give us the power and the resources and the strength of mind and knowledge of systems to impact the way systems are torn down that are ineffective and the way that systems are built that will be more effective and helpful for our communities.
Love you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is May. Thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you are here, not only in Massachusetts, but in Cambridge, and especially at Harvard, as you know, an institution that was formed in the 17th century to have people of color be here talking about this specific subject. I mean, just want to grasp the beauty of that. My question has to do with incarcerated women, and how that population is now the fastest growing incarcerated population, as shown by a report by the Vera Institute. I want to hear from all of you, but specifically from the women on the panel, about what the movement needs to do, how it needs to reshape itself to address the specific issues that women face. Because as you know, if we learned anything from Black Panther, is that we should probably trust women, and especially Black women. So thank you for that.
All right, so if we're going to look at women, well, at some point it had leveled off, and now it's a spike again, with women being the fastest growing population. But before we even look at that, we have to look at Black girls being suspended from public school twice the rate as white girls. And so that means that they are being pushed out of education. And so if you're pushed out of education, then where are you going from there? So when we talk about that school to prison pipeline, we very rarely talk about little girls, you know, and I'm not saying anything, you know, about you brothers, but it's like my brother's keeper and boys being suspended and 1 in 3 Black men. But, you know, my hope is that we don't reach this epic proportion to where the amount of women and the amount of men inside prison are equal. You know, I'm hoping that we're learning from that. Now, what we're doing for women who are in prison is that, yeah, there's a dignity campaign now. Because why? Because we can't get sanitary napkins in there. We can't get toilet paper in there. Women are being shackled when they have their babies. You know, can you just picture that now? A woman is having a baby and you want to shackle her? There's a male officer in that delivery room. And so there's a fight, and we are in it. We are in this fight, and we are in this fight to liberate our sisters who are inside. And we are in this fight to disrupt this school to prison pipeline that is directly affecting young girls of color.
I want to, just to, 2 sentences. I want to commend Vera and Nick Turner for that report, but the Women's Prison Association discovered the fast-growing rate of women's incarceration almost 10 years ago. It just didn't get talked about as much because it was put out by a women's organization, just so you know. The other thing is there is a national movement being led by a woman from Boston, Andrea James. The National Council, the National Council of Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls is running the Dignity campaign, along with doing a lot of other national work around specific incarceration policies that impact women. But they're also doing organizing training and building chapters in multiple states so that women on the ground can be, again, part of the solutions in their communities. So there is a lot going on in response to the fast-growing population of women going to prison. We're going to take some more questions.
Hi, my name is Kate. My experience with this subject is that once a week I go to the men's medium security prison in Concord, Mass. Here, one of the 2 prisons in Concord. And I'm a volunteer in the Toastmaster club there. Toastmasters International is a public speaking organization with thousands of clubs around the world. There are like 9 in Cambridge. And I've been doing it 5 years, going about once a week, and doing it is, I've had a very exciting, adventurous life, and I would definitely say it's one of the top 5 most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. And you can tell my voice is shaking. It really moves me to the core, and The men that come into the ed program there, they are so decent, they are so respectful, they are so hungry to better themselves and to get out and stay out. And they're doing everything they can for themselves to be in a position that when they get out, they can stay out and they can navigate the world. And if you ever, with all your organizations, need public speakers, men have been behind the walls. You could tap the prisons that have the Toastmaster clubs, because these guys can really give a speech.
Thank you for that.
I just have a real quick question. This is more theoretical. Well, no, not really. I often get in conversations with people who aspire to be abolitionists regarding the carceral state, and I believe I am an abolitionist, but I also believe that there must be external oversight mechanisms available to prisons so that there's a way to know what's happening to women and men incarcerated right now that's outside of the corrections framework, because men and women die all the time, or they suffer mental illness or physical illnesses that aren't treated because they don't have a safe way to tell. So I'd like to know what your opinion is about being a hardcore abolitionist and the necessary requirements to provide some institutional external oversight mechanism outside the prison, and the weighing of that, because abolitionists don't believe there should be any more committees. We know what we need. We know we need to close these things. We don't need any more groups. We don't need any more of that. We just need to shut them down, and that's a great radical position to hold. I hold it, but I also know that, you know, women and men are dying because there's no one to tell. So I'd like to know, you know, how do you look at how do you stand in between, and the interstices between that?
Okay. No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you know, abolition is a complicated thing for me, because while I understand the spirit of abolition, I also know the practicality of getting there. So I do believe that as long as we are going to have prisons, we should put as few people as possible in them, and that they should be the best conditions available to a human being if we have to contain a human being in a space where they can't get out, right? And there should be full transparency. That is one of the things we're fighting for in New York City with the rebuilding of the jail system, that it has to be transparent. Community needs to have access. And it should not kind of be behind this brick wall that no one can see. My thoughts about abolition are very complex. And what I like to say to really strong abolitionists who want to jump right from what we have now to having no prisons is, if you look at the slavery, the movement to abolish slavery in this country, it came at a very high cost. And I've yet to see a group of abolitionists get together and say, we're willing to pay that price.
Right.
There's a very high cost to abolition here in the United States.
Right.
And those of us who are on the side, who are on the other side of that, are still experiencing the rage and the hatred and the anger of the side that lost. We're still paying a price.
Right.
So I just want to, kind of look at it in a balanced way. No one wants more prisons.
Exactly.
I want a whole lot fewer prisons, but I think we're a long way from abolition.
Yeah, on that point, I agree with everything Vivian said. It's about the reality of the situation. And for me, it's not about the structures, it's talking about prisons. It's about how we see one another, right? Because the way we see one another gives us the power to treat one another differently. You understand what I'm saying? So, like, I think about Europe, I think about the Scandinavian countries. Now, people are held accountable. They go away to a place that doesn't strip them of their dignity and their humanity. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. It's about how do we treat people? How do we see people? And I still believe that the 13th Amendment is so much in the psyche of people's minds that, I mean, even the rappers call it state property. That when you commit a crime, you become state property, and they tear you down. You're a slave, you're a property. They can do anything to you, because that's the way they see you.
Yeah.
Right?
And the 13th Amendment is a product of what? Abolition.
Abolition.
All right. Signifying.
Good point.
One more, can I add to that? My dear sister, I see you.
Okay.
I mean that, you know, because being in there, man, it's hell.
Yeah.
It's the closest thing we'll get to hell is prison on this earth.
Yeah. And I've watched people experience a slow death, being sentenced to a slow death.
I feel it, and I also feel people who've been harmed.
Yeah.
And so, until we're able to fix the conditions in our communities, until we're able to figure out as a whole how to deal with that, right, and how to have a community response to trauma, abolition is an abstract idea. If you ask anyone, whether it's black, brown, white, red, yellow, if they want to get rid of police in their communities, you're going to have like a tough conversation. And so, like, I run across abolitionists in California all the time, and we have these tough conversations because I've been in these walls with some of these folks who, you know, I may not want to live next to.
Right.
You know,
Tell the truth, brother.
I'm being honest, you know. And so until we're able to deal with unresolved trauma, you know, in our communities, and the trauma in our communities are very deep-rooted trauma that we do not talk about, we do not deal with. We lock it away in a box and put it in the basement, and we don't deal with it at all. Until we're able to have the courage and the resources to go in that basement, unlock that box, you know, and deal with it and talk about it as a community, I think we got to work towards reform, and reform in a way that gets us close to a model that addresses the underlying issue of somebody that, you know, is having issues. And so when I say I see you because I want to get there. I want to get there so bad because I do not want anybody to experience what I've experienced behind those walls.
Right.
Thank you.
I think, just an addendum to the response, I think, and this is maybe for people entering into this conversation rather than those who have wrestled with these questions, I think that you have to always keep in mind that there are genealogies here. And they're not just historical ones or abstractions, that there's a time zero. And the reason why that matters is because we actually have built systems to do harm before people do harm to others or themselves. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we will always stand at the precipice of this moral dilemma about what to do with an individual who we seem not to have options with in order to protect others from them. But we are collectively responsible for time zero, for building systems, for voting for leaders, for walking away, for tuning out, and that harm is cumulative. And the amazing thing about most people, from whatever walk of life they come from, is it often takes a lot of harm before they become the person you've just described. Because most people, even if they have quote unquote broken the law, are not the person you can't live next door to. The mythology is that they aren't, but they are living witnesses to that precisely. So we have to keep the systems of oppression that are built and baked into American society to ensure that there will be few people who actually can survive a healthy existence in the society. Because the systems are not intended for that. And the last thing about this, because this is where I get really unhappy, is we have built data collection regimes to be ever more sophisticated in their ability to predict knowing time zero, where somebody's going to end up, and we have built stop and frisks, just to be really precise, or other forms of zero tolerance policing, or policies in education, we might think of these, if you're entering this conversation, as ways of sort of crime prevention, crime deterrence, ways of keeping track of a little girl in school that's disruptive, making it harder for other students to learn. But what they really are, the state's response to these moments are ways to put you in the system as early as possible, not incarceration, but simply a record, a mark, something, a data point, so that it's much easier later on to simply disappear you altogether, so that you will have no claim whatsoever on the state at any level, including the right to be a victim after you have been convicted of a crime. So if we continue to accept the logic of efficiency in the name of any kind of everyday policing that we all bear witness to, or ways of keeping track of behavior in our classrooms, or as the madness of gun control debate right now, putting more security resource officers or arming teachers in the classroom, all of these are precisely the system that created harm in the first place.
Thank you all for being here and all the work that you do. I wanted to ask, this is for anyone here, but just as students, and I like to consider myself someone who cares about activism and being involved. I'm sure everyone here does as well. Even reading headlines recently can be dismaying and discouraging, and you all have been through so much worse than that, and despite that have just still been able to be resilient and do so much great work. So I just wanted to ask, what keeps you going and what gives you hope right now to keep doing the work that you're doing?
For me, I just came off a 4-day conference at Columbia University, Beyond the Bars, and on Saturday night, a group of us went into a prison to bring that experience to a group of men who were inside MDC Brooklyn prison. And even if it was just for a couple of hours, they were out of that prison and into an environment that was caring, nurturing, and we were just, it was an arts program, and they were sharing poetry. They did some amazing artwork. And all of us who went in there on that Saturday night who were free came out feeling like, we were so fortunate and blessed to go in there. And we also felt like, look at this. Some of the best and the brightest are locked away, where they can be out here making a major contribution to this society that is broken. Yeah, and that keeps me going.
Thank you.
Yeah, but one of the things that keeps me going is, and I always tell people the story that when I was in Greediford, the 37 years, it's 800 men serving life in Greediford prison. And I don't know if y'all know about Philadelphia, but I'm from North Philly. North Philly is like tough, hard, grow up tough, hard. And I always see myself that way. And the day that I was able to escape the sentence of death, because life without parole is a death sentence in Pennsylvania. And the day that I was leaving, I was coming off the block, and like you said in the profile, I was president of Lifers Organization for 20 years, and we had, and so I grew up with these men. I was with these guys longer than I was ever with my family, and so when I was leaving that day, there was like 300 guys in the hallway, and they were all hugging me, and they were wishing me well, and I was crying like a baby. I was weeping. And God would say, oh yeah, you happy you was going home? Yeah, I was happy I was going home, but my tears was who I was leaving behind. You know what I mean? Because, our organization inside was a political organization. We fought and we advocated for changing the laws so that life becomes eligible for parole. And as I hugged each of these guys and looked into their eyes, I knew intimately that they were going to die there unless something changed. And a lot of them deserved to be out on the street even more than me because of their circumstances, because of the culpability, and all that. And I cried like a baby. And that kind of keeps me going to fight for these guys because of the men and the women. I know a lot of women lifers up at Muncie and Cambridge Springs in Pennsylvania. And that keeps me going because the sentence of life without parole is a deep injustice.
Yeah, what drains me is what is necessary to get the resources to do the work. That's draining.
That's draining.
But what inspires me and gives me hope is seeing people rise up under oppression and take responsibility for beating down the structures that are oppressing them. Those who have that revolutionary spirit. What also gives me hope is history, that no evil, oppressive regime lasts forever. They all fall, historically, because people can only take so much pressure before they rise up. And I get hope from my inspiring ancestors. I get hope when I read the brilliance of Frederick Douglass. I get hope when I think about the brilliance of Malcolm and Martin. I get hope when I remember the lesson that Brother Cornell taught, that optimism depends on circumstances and data. But hope says that despite all of the things we see and touch around us, I still believe that we can get where we're going.
It's a nice segue.
No, I just want to thank you all from the depths of my heart. It brings a joy to have you all present such intellectual eloquence, and moral compassion, and spiritual maturity in such a bleak moment in the history of this empire. And the very idea that something like this of such high quality takes place here at Harvard, we thank our dear sister, my distinguished colleague, Elizabeth Hinton, and the others who work with her, but also the fact that to have the crowd that we have. You see, that this, I go back 50 years when I arrived. I went straight to Norfolk Prison and Black Panther Breakfast Program in Jamaica Plain. That's 50 years ago. And we had about a little small group. We look around and look at all the folk here now, all the different colors. You see, that's a beautiful thing, even given the despair that my distinguished colleague, Khalil Muhammad, talked about. Despair is very real. Despair is a good thing, though. It just means you're sensitive. It means you're deeply concerned. It's the very brook of fire through which you must pass to be a hope. I don't like to talk about hope. The question is being a hope. You all are a hope, and that's very, very important. That's very, very important. You see.
Thank you.
Jay, Cheryl, and Vivian, and Tyrone, the names themselves. My question is this: how do we reach a point, though, where the precious young people, especially who find themselves on the way to incarceration, are perceived as if they have exactly the same value as that of a Harvard student? That's the question, you see. Because if you're already disrespected, you're already dishonored, you're already locked into decrepit educational systems, inadequate housing, mass unemployment, and underemployment. And so the perception of who you are is different than that of others. It's the class question, too. If it were black upper middle class students going to jail, in the same way our precious poor black students are going to jail, we'd have different kind of black leadership because they're not perceived as having the exact same value and significance. Well, let's just start with Harvard students. Now, if Harvard students were dealing with the same circumstances, dealing with the same challenges, America would be so creative and innovative and ingenious in terms of understanding the plight that they're going to because they're so precious and they're so priceless. How come we can't have that kind of thinking when it comes to Jamal and Letitia and Juanita and Carlos and the others? That is a serious blow against the white supremacy, the class inequality, the various cultural forms of arrogance when it comes to they can deal with what they dealing with. We have to go on about our way or turn our backs. And so this wonderful moral and spiritual awakening that's taking place among young folk, including here at our own beloved Harvard, we have to understand the degree to which those precious folk are still viewed as somehow less than a Harvard student. That's part of the problem right there. If we can't reach the point where brothers and sisters in Roxbury are viewed exactly the same way as Harvard students here, then it's still major obstacles, major impediments. I'm sorry to go on so long, but I just...
No. That just made my day. Yeah. I mean, there's no response to that except to say, Khalil talked about we have to go to ground zero. We really need to start at zero and think of everybody equally, but we have built a structure where we know that is just not true. We don't treat one another equally. And I don't wish these oppressions on any Harvard student, but I do wish the opportunity on those folks in Roxbury, the same opportunity that you Harvard students have. And we've just got to work together to make that happen.
Just to answer the last question, what gives me hope, or what keeps me going? Spaghetti. I'm so serious. Which leads me to my next response. The reason I say spaghetti is because I was at an organizing meeting with women who had lost children to gun violence on both sides of the spectrum. And I was telling your class this earlier, Professor E. And we went around and I asked them, what does justice mean to them? And we got around and all these folks were, talking about different things. And this little 7-year-old kid looked up in the sky and he said, spaghetti. I'm like, spaghetti? We all chuckled and laughed. And I said, why do you say spaghetti? He said, because it's good and it fills me up. Now I'll go back to something that Dr. West said love is what justice looks like in public. And if you, when I was locked up, I broke down the word justice, and you can relate it back to a Latin concept word called equitas, and it means symmetry, the same, right? And there was this word that I've learned over my organizing experience called sawabona. Say it with me, sawabona.
Sawabona.
Say it again, sawabona.
Sawabona.
Look at the person next to you and say sawabona.
Sawabona.
It means I see you. I see you. It's symmetry, it's equitas, it's love. I see I'm no different than you. I'm no different than you. I'm no different than you. Now turn to your neighbor again and say sawabona. Look him in the eye and say
sawabona.
And so to answer your question directly, it's a policy, because I'm a policy head, and I always think about how to frame these in the concept of policy. In California, Prop 21 passed, which basically criminalized youth. And it made it possible for 14-year-olds to be charged and sent to adult court without even a hearing. The district attorneys will look at the police report and say, due to the nature of the crime, we're going to send this child into adult court. And this persisted for years and years and years until we had the opportunity to work on Prop 57 in California, which eviscerated Prop 21. And it said that these kids are kids no matter what, right? And it took a lot of that public education you were talking about. That a lot of telling the stories of these kids and putting this in front in a very loud way in the public discourse. These are kids. There was this one poster where they showed handcuffs of the kid, and the handcuffs didn't fit his hands because his wrists were so small. And when we went to the ballot box, we were polling at around 60%. We won with over 70% because, and when we did the exit poll, we were asking people, why did you vote for Prop 57? And they said, because we were criminalizing babies. And I think it goes to something more sinister in this country where the color of your skin dictates your humanity. Like, we are not allowed to be human, just like we are not allowed to be victims. More time than none, if you look at race as a spectrum, with white being on one side and black being on the other side, no matter where you're at in this world, if you're closer to black, you're treated worse. If you're closer to white, you're treated better. And in America, if you're closer to black, you're criminalized, just for the smallest mistake. And I think, until we have those deep-rooted conversations in a very public way, not a private way, but in a very public way, at Harvard, at Berkeley, at NYU, in the hood, in the churches, until we start to have those conversations, starting from, that these are babies. Because this system criminalizes kids. I think in Philadelphia, there's about 400 kids that are doing life without the possibility of parole right now. In Philly, 500 kids are doing life without the possibility of parole right now. So that's what Dr. West said is so deep, and it's real. But there is a path forward. There is a path forward. I don't want us to get into this thing like, oh, this problem is daunting. There is a path forward, and we can have these conversations, but it's going to take places like Harvard to have these conversations, and not just today. Not just this beyond the gates. This is great. This is great. But this needs to happen all the time. This place needs to be filled with students and faculty and administration. Because that's what it's going to take, is conversation.
And I think the other thing it's going to take is, I really believe in this. I think one of the first questioners talked about her experience of going inside the prisons. We talking about criminal justice. You have to go inside the prisons and see who's there, and talk to the men and women behind the wall. I mean, you will, just people in general, will get a totally different perspective, because I know that majority of Americans get their idea of who's behind the wall from movies, TVs, and politicians. And it creates an image in your mind. When you say prisoner, it automatically conjures up an image of who that person is. And until you go in, and I'm telling you, the worst thing in the world is a textbook criminologist. I've met a lot of criminologists who had never been inside of a prison, never met anybody locked up. And so you really got to go inside. You got to meet people and see people as who they are, and not as the label of a prisoner.
So we have 2 questions. We have to leave at 6 in order to participate in a candlelight. I want to say something quickly about being at Harvard and reminding us why this conference is happening. This conference is happening as a response to activism to create college education opportunities for inside students to attend Harvard University. That's why we're here. And to quote Toni Morrison, when a person tells you who they are, you should listen to them. Mm-hmm. Harvard's not ready for that. Mm. And to Brother West's response, Harvard has systematically miseducated Negroes to literally stand in for oppression, to be in the gap between the long traditions of white supremacy that have worn, white faces, and allowed a certain amount of black folks to come in. Now, people come in and do all sorts of things with opportunity, including resist, including try to transform. Brian Stevenson is a graduate of Harvard Law School, so this is not a one-way street. But make no mistake about it, this university has long stood in as an exemplar of American empire, of American exceptionalism. And frankly, I'm experiencing it for the first time, trying to figure out how in the 21st century it could be as robust as it actually is. I mean, Does it just metastasize and reinvent itself each generation? It's just hard to believe. That's all I can tell you. So the work is much steeper if the people who are part of the institution believe somehow that the institution is different than it is. It stands in its history. It tells you who it is. You have the opportunity to come and do things differently, but if you just play by the rules, if you just color inside the lines, you will stand on the other side of the precipice that these folks represent. So try to color outside the lines. We're going to take these last two together, just so that you're both heard.
Yeah, so I'd just like to thank you for this really wonderfully thought-provoking conversation. And my question actually overlaps really nicely with Dr. West's because it returns to the idea of classroom politics. And I'm currently working as a teacher in a high school in downtown Boston, and many of my students are coming from and returning to communities in which gun violence and incarceration figure really prominently. And so I'm just wondering in what ways you think that the high school classroom and even the middle school and elementary school classroom can engage more productively with this conversation, and what kinds of things educators can do when working with students who are intensely familiar with the effects of incarceration and gun violence.
And my question is actually pretty closely related to that, in that a dear family friend who's basically like my little brother is facing gun charges on Thursday and maybe looking at 18 months or more, and I wanted to know if you all had any message that you might be willing to convey, that I could convey to him with that hanging over him. Thanks.
Okay.
All together. So response, and if you have a final thought.
I'll do the first question. I wanted to do the first question because in a conference yesterday, my colleague Michelle and I sat in on a panel of youth. And these youth had something in common. They had an incarcerated parent. And they also were a part of a group called Echoes of Incarceration. And so what they did was, with the help of a brilliant young patient man, Jeremy Robbins, they began to tell their stories and make documentaries on what they were going through as a child. And as they began to grow, then they began not just to tell their stories. They were at Columbia University yesterday educating that audience, you know, on what to do. And it was a tough audience because they were learning on what to do with young folks, similar to you. And I wish we had some young folks in this audience today, because oftentimes we talk about them, and then I look around the room and there's no young folks who are impacted. So one way to start this is to bring young folks on the campus, you know, and get them involved in these conversations, because I think that you would be surprised.
Thank you.
So I'll answer the question briefly, and then just some final thoughts. I think that for students who are living in communities that are disparately impacted by our criminal justice and other oppressive systems, the best thing that we can do is have teachers in our schools that tell the truth. I went to grade school and high school in Port Washington, Long Island, which is mostly white, and I was told so many lies about the history of this country and what it would mean for me as an individual, that it literally handicapped me for any future until I got somewhere to learn, until I learned the truth. The best thing you can do for those young people is tell them the truth about what they're dealing with. And then they can find the tools to survive the circumstances and to change the circumstances. I don't know what to tell you about your friend that's facing charges. You know, depending on a number of factors, the outcome could be what it is. But support your friend. But then think about what you can do on a systemic level to make sure that other people's friends don't get caught up in systems that are not fair and disparately impact certain communities. My final thought is that we have a long way to go, but we have truly come a long way. We were not having this conversation 20 years ago. We need a conversation that undergirds all of this, a conversation that's not about crime and safety, but one that is about systemic racism, white supremacy, and capitalism. Because that is what supports all of this.
I agree.
And if you don't get down and destroy that foundation, you can tear down the house. You can tear down the house, but somebody will build something bigger and better on the foundation you leave.
I didn't give a final thought. My final thought is this, is that I see many people who have college programs inside here. And I will challenge you to hire somebody who's formerly incarcerated and just take a tiny half a step backwards and let them lead so that our voice can be heard like it's heard today.
Okay, ditto everything that these two women said. I just going to, because it's 6 o'clock, and they say they want to end sharp. And we got a plane to catch. But I want to say, again, thank the organizers for bringing us here. But most of all, when I always talk about going inside the prison, I just want to thank two individuals. I mean, because you sit in prison, you know, you read everything, and you never think about meeting people, right? And then one day, Cornel West came into Greedyford Prison, and the auditorium was standing room only, and he gave us such a powerful, powerful message. I just want to thank you, Cornel West, for coming to Greedyford on a couple of occasions. And I also want to thank this man here. He came to Greedyford when I was inside of Greedyford. We had this debate about, was I home? I went in with you. No, I was still incarcerated when he came in to visit us. And he had such a powerful, you know, we read his book, and then he comes in to visit us. And it was just such a powerful discussion. And those kind of things have a huge impact when people come in and visit and begin to see you as a human being, and see you as an equal.
Bring us home quickly.
He said quick. I'm just honored to be here with y'all. You know, the old kid from Stockton, man, and to be on the stage with Titans and in the presence of amazing historical figures that history will be extremely kind to. We stand on your shoulders. I stand on your shoulders. Just remember that. You know, I'm a young buck, and I just appreciate the work, you know, and the dedication that y'all have done. And Dr. Cornel West, again, thank you, because you have a generation of young black men watching you, brother, and I'm one of them. So thank you, and I thank all of y'all for coming and being here. And Elizabeth, like, you are amazing. I remember you.
To Elizabeth Hinton, one of the organizers.
Yes, yes. Elizabeth! Woo! Please stand up, stand up, stand up. Yes, yes,
come on.
Yes, stand up, stand up. Yes, yes.
All right, Tyrone Wirtz, Reverend Vivian Nixon, Cheryl Wicks, Jay Jordan, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.